Hello, students, and welcome to the class. I'm sure you would be looking forward to the story writing session because all of us grow up amidst lots and lots of stories. There are short stories, there are long stories, some fiction, some factual stories, and of course, our never ending mythological stories. In today's session, we are going to dissect story writing into different components which play a very essential role in the designing of story. Through this session, you would be able to equip yourselves with the technical competence to write a story instead of just weaving your imagination in words. So, let's get going. First of all, what is a story writing? A story writing is a work of fiction or imagination that is usually written in easily understandable grammatical structure. Now, easily understandable grammatical structure would mean you do not require some extraordinary language skills to structure your story. Rather, what is more important is a natural flow of speech. There should be a nice coherence and a nice pace at which you tell your story. Story writing is meant to be read at single sitting and therefore it should be as direct and brief as possible. Can you recall, children, when you write your stories, you tend to write very long stories? Look at this again. Your stories should be direct and brief as possible. As much as possible, you should be very brief and precise. That is why we call it a short story writing at your level. As I discussed with you just now, what are the different themes or key elements of story writing? Typically, story writing has 5 key elements. Very important, the first one is character. That is why it is important that before you sit down to write a story, you design your characters well. Number 2 is setting of the story. Your story should clearly tell what is the time and place in which your story is set. Third important element of story writing is plot. As we discussed, plot should be simple and as interesting as possible. Then it is good if your story has a conflict. There should be some intense conflict, some dilemma, some situations where the character has to choose between certain things and follow his ideals, and so on and so forth. Lastly, your story should have a theme. It should cater to the interest of majority of readers. So, let's revise the 5 key elements which are character, setting, plot, conflict and theme. We will now go in detail intricately of all these 5 key elements one by one. Let's begin. First of all, we come to character. Characters, we all are characters on this stage of life. Am I right? What is a character? Character is someone or something that takes part in actions depicted in a short story. Remember what Shakespeare said: all the world's a stage and all the human beings characters. So, characters are people who take part in actions depicted in the short story. It could be a living person, a dead person, a ghost. That sounds interesting, isn't it? You love to write ghost stories, I know. A ghost, an imaginary character, a robot, a dog, a toy, and so on and so forth. Just imagine if you know all this, what could be the range of your stories? So, generally, I have seen that you tend to limit yourselves to just living people as characters in your stories. Now, look at this again, and then you can design absolutely new and interesting stories. How to select characters? There is a golden rule for selecting characters. That is, for selecting characters in a short story, fewer is better. Which means you need not just put in lots of characters which make your story cumbersome. A story writing would more effectively convey its meaning if it has very few characters. One protagonist, one other main character, and no supporting or side characters. You may have one antagonist as well, but any story needs to have one protagonist. Protagonist is the hero of the story, antagonist is the villain of the story. So, in case you do not prefer to add villains in your stories, you can omit that, but there should be one protagonist and any other main character in the story. Next, we have setting of a story. Time frame is everything. There is nothing without time. So, we need to understand what is the time frame and what is the place that we are choosing for the setting of our story writing. Because in stories, you have to vividly describe the scenes. What kind of scenes? Such as a supermarket, a bedroom, a crowded metro train, or drizzling evening. Unlimited list. These descriptions are very important to make reader immerse in the plot. Plus, you are able to provide necessary visual imagery only if you have set the time frame and place rightly. For example, if you are going to discuss a ghost story, of course, the time could not be broad daylight. We enjoy ghosts in absolute darkness and weird setting. There should be thunder and lightning, there should be storm, and there should be darkness and rain and what not. That would enhance your impact of story. Just an example to make you understand. How to select time frame? Your time frame may vary from hours to days to weeks to years. The golden rule in selecting time frame for story writing is to keep it shorter and have it single. Why so? We should keep it shorter because, as we discussed earlier, the story is to read in one single sitting. So, if we just elongate the time or have multiple time frames, it would confuse our readers. Story writing that has setting of few hours may be clearer and more effective than with setting of few months or years. Plus, then you will have to keep in mind all the details of changes that took place over those few years, which becomes very difficult and time consuming. Because side by side, you have to keep your exam purpose also in mind. So, a story should be short, crisp, and clear. What is the importance of description? Creating a visual imagery. Why is it so important? Because unless we vividly describe the surroundings, how will the reader become a part of the story? How would the reader live our story? So, the surroundings must be absolutely clear and very important, be appealing to the five senses of your readers. Mark these words. They should appeal to the five senses of your readers. What an experience it is when the reader can feel, touch, smell, see those things, hear those sounds. So be poetic, use suitable adjectives, script the dialogues well, and even you can deploy side characters. Do whatever you can to ensure that the reader lives your story while reading. So the reader actually becomes a part of the story itself. Students, have you ever experienced while reading a sad story, unknowingly tears floating down your eyes? Or while reading a humorous story, a smile coming on your face. Have you noticed that? So, if it has happened, it means the story that you read would have achieved its purpose. Because the purpose of story writing is to engage the reader completely. Now we come to plot. Plot is the bulk. Plot is the flesh and muscles of story writing. Because what is the story about? That is what plot is. Before we discuss the times frame and the place and the visual imagery, all those things tell how a story takes place. But what is it based upon is the plot. So, plot is the flesh and muscles of story writing. It comprises of all the events and all the actions and all the drama that takes place in your story. The idea is you should be able to be coherent. You should be able to logically connect the events and actions. So the plot would be stronger. And the stronger plot you create, better interest would it generate among readers. A plot has these three things for must. It has a start, it has a body, and it has a conclusive end. They are linked to each other, and there is a perfect concord among these three elements of a plot, that is, the start, the body, and the end. That is why we always reiterate in your classes that focus on these three subparts of the plot: how you begin your story, how you develop your story, and the way you conclude, how you end your story. These things have a very powerful impact. Imagine when you go to theater to watch a very nice movie. All the actors are the star cast is, they are all the superstars, and then where you sit down to watch the movie but the story is weak. Tell me, in spite of all the good acting and all the stardom associated with that, all the glamour in the story, in the movie, you still do not enjoy it. Why? Because the plot was weak. So that is the importance of a nice, good plot. Conflict. Now this is something a bit advanced level as per your class, but still there is no harm if you know about it. Conflict is the dilemmas that your protagonist is going to face in the story. So you must choose such a start that your reader gets hooked to the story. That same dilemma goes on in the mind of reader also as to what is going to happen, what is going to be decided by the protagonist, what should he decide, how should he behave in a particular situation. So create confusion or question in reader's mind by the first line of your story. Again, first line is very important. Please, students, gone are the days when we used to begin our stories with once upon a time. That is obsolete. We are not going to do that at all. Please set this as default. You are not going to start your stories with once upon a time. The starting should be something captivating. Your reader must try to get answer from best of their ability and experience, but they should finally end up digging into subsequent lines of your stories to quench their temporary inquisitiveness. What does it mean? Your first line should be intriguing. It should arouse the curiosity of the reader, and the reader should be forced or should be pushed to visit the further part of your story. Only then you can take the reader till the end. Next is the theme. Theme or the central idea. Everything should be done keeping theme or central idea in mind because that binds the story. So, central idea or main belief presented by a story writing is called theme. Now, plot was the flesh and muscles, but theme is the skeleton or the framework of our short story, and that skeleton is the basic. What is the theme? Whether my story is based on a tragedy, whether it is a thrill, or whatever. So, that idea is decorated by plot, setting, conflict, and characters. So, which is the first thing you will think before you sit down to write a story? It is the theme. But fortunately, students, you are generally provided the theme by the examiner himself. You are given a kind of outline or a beginning of the story to develop. So, broadly, that makes your work easy. It is how creatively you decorate your story with plot, setting, conflict, and characters that matters the most. Okay, having discussed all the different elements of story, 5 elements, now we are going to discuss 10 important tips to write story writing, which are as follows. This is just a recap of what we did just now, and plus it is also a reaffirmation of the basics of a good story writing. Tip number 1, fewer the better, right? So we should have fewer characters. Okay. Tip number 2, we know the theme, so characters should be progressing as per the theme. Develop characters for theme. Tip 3, single and short time frame. Remember, don't elongate the time to years and even centuries. Just stick to hours and days. Tip 4, I love this, vivid surroundings. Each and everything should be given a minute detail which should be appealing to our visual needs. Then tip 5, again I love this one. This is the catchy first line. Remember, we are not going to say once upon a time ever in any of our stories. Tip number 6, choose a suitable point of view. You should be able to justify the actions of your characters. That is very, very important. So, choose a suitable point of view. Tip number 7, there should be one conflict only. Your protagonist should not be too much confused. There should not be too many dilemmas in your story. Just one. And that conflict should be intense but real. It should not be superficial. It should not sound like deliberately we are creating a situation to just fill in with the conflict. Theme should be always kept in focus because the whole story, remember, theme is the skeleton. It's based on theme. Break rules if needed. Yes, You have to lift the bar, you have to break rules. That is, I think, so very interesting task for you because we love breaking rules. And sometimes in your creative expressions, breaking rules definitely helps. Never in real life. Don't try this in your school life. But for written expressions, definitely you can break rules if it enhances your creativity. Marking scheme for short story writing. This is again very important. Title and moral. Moral you can exclude. It is not mandatory that your story should have a moral, but yes, definitely, title is of 1 mark. Why we wrote moral here? Because if it has a moral, it can be highlighted directly or indirectly. That will enhance your story. Then we have content. The entire content is of 4 marks. And then we have expression of the story, which is of 5 marks. Then we split it up into 2.5 plus 2.5 marks. What is it? The first half is for your coherence and relevance of ideas. Remember the theme and all. That is for 2.5 marks. And the second part is accuracy, the grammar, the appropriate words, the vocab, the spellings, what you are using. That is for another 2.5 mark. In totality, expression is for 5 marks. The beginning of the story, if it's given in a question, please adhere to it. Follow it. Now, there are some solved examples of short story writing. Okay, so write a short story with the help of cues given below. Give a suitable title to the story. You can go through these cues and then just look at this. Only this much is your story, right? Surprised? Because you tend to write quite long and cumbersome stories. So that is why a sample has been provided to you. Look at it and follow it. Look at the title, a series of unfortunate events, which is very captivating. The moment I read this, I would like to see, okay, what all were the unfortunate events? I would like to see. Look at this also. Opening line is not once upon a time I was, going here and there. It just begins I sat down with relief as I ticked off the last task in the checklist. So it has already aroused the curiosity which is required to go through the entire story. So you have to write your stories in this manner. Even look at the concluding line. Alas, this interjection adds lot of interest in the story. Alas, I couldn't even make it to my best friend's wedding. That is the concluding line. Then there is a practice question for you. Write a short story with the help of cues given below. Give a suitable title to the story. Attempt the practice question in classwork notebook. So you have to write a complete short story in your classwork notebook. And students, one more thing. Whether the question says or not that you have to give a suitable title to the story, it is mandatory for you. Again, set it as a default. You always have to give your story a suitable title, and nothing like it if you add a byline to the story, which means name of the writer, because we should take pride in our work. Whatever you are creating, you are the creator of your story, then why not mention your name? So always write the title and the byline, which means your name, in your story, and whether the question asks or not, you have to do this. So that's all for your story writing. You have one homework assignment question also in the other PDF, which you are supposed to do in your fair notebooks. So enjoy the story writing. I am sure you will come up with wonderful stories to read. All the best.